Hello and welcome to another video where we will be taking a deep dive into 7 of the fights taking place this weekend at UFC on ESPN plus 25. And I want to say a big thank you to everyone that has been hitting the like button on all the videos that I've put out this week. If you would like another live stream this Saturday, a few hours before the fights take place, where I'll be going through all the fights that take place this weekend to try and find a decent value prop bet for every single fight, then hit the like button below. And if this video gets 300 likes, we will do that live stream on fight day. The kind of fight day video we've done over the last few weeks where we've gone through, lottery ticket parlays, fun bets, all that kind of stuff, and I answer all your questions about this weekend's fights. If you don't know what a prop bet is just a bet on a highly specific outcome on an MMA fight. So for example, Blachowicz wins by knockout or TKO would be considered a prop. If you want that live stream on fight day, hit the like button below, 300 likes, and I will do the live stream. Now, I'll try and do it a little bit earlier on than I did last week. I'm well ahead of research this week, so I'm not as busy. So yeah, boys, hit the like button right now, and also please subscribe if you haven't already. But enough of all that talk, let's get into the first fight that I want to talk about in today's video, which is going to be Diego Sanchez against Michel Pereira. So before I started researching this fight, I thought it would be a classic dog or pass situation. Could never have imagined myself favouring Pereira here after we saw him literally gas out in 2 to 3 minutes of his last fight against Tristan Connolly. But after researching this fight, I actually came away liking Pereira a lot more than I thought I would. So to give you some context, first of all, let's start by checking out the odds on this fight. So Diego Sanchez currently around about a 2.40 underdog, which is plus 140 for an implied probability of 42%. So to get any value on Diego here, you want to be giving him around about a 50% chance of winning. And then if we look at the odds on Michel Pereira, he's currently around about, we'll call it an average of 1.61, which is minus 164 for an implied probability of 62%. So to get any value on Pereira here, you need to be giving him at least a 65% chance of winning. So I thought that this would be a dog or pass matchup because we all have these visions of Diego after the last, over the last few years in his fights against guys like Mickey Gall and Craig White, where he's looking very, very strong from top position, beating his opponents up from top position and really wearing them down. And when you think about the way that Pereira's last fight against Tristan Connolly played out, where Connolly was able to weather the storm in the first 2-3 minutes, drag Pereira into deep waters, drag him to the ground, grind on him on the ground, and pick up a win, you're starting to think like, you know what, maybe Diego is going to be a good bet at underdog odds. But that is not at all what I found. It was actually really disappointing when I went back and studied Diego Sanchez's fights from the last few years, because he's very slow, very flat-footed, and very static at this stage in his career, which leaves him wide open to the explosive strikes that Pereira is going to be throwing at him very early on in this matchup. And I actually come away from researching this fight feeling a little bit sad, because Diego Sanchez, here he is with Jim Miller. Sanchez is one of the legends of the sport, right? Season 1 Ultimate Fighter winner. He's given us so many amazing fights over the years. He is a UFC legend. I'm not sure if he's in the Hall of Fame yet, but it's inevitable that he will be one day. And, Diego Sanchez has lived and trained in Albuquerque, New Mexico for a very, very long time. And this card is taking place in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So it would be a great chance for the UFC to take care of one of their legends, one of their elite veterans. It doesn't get a bigger veteran, a bigger legend of the sport than Diego Sanchez, and it was the UFC's opportunity to take care of him, man. He's 38 years old now. His better days are behind him. They could have given him a really winnable fight in his hometown, give him an excuse to win on Saturday night and then go out and retire on a win. But instead, they have matched him up against an opponent in Michel Pereira that is very likely to turn Diego Sanchez into another highlight reel, which is really, really sad. I think the UFC should do more to take care of guys like Diego Sanchez And this weekend would have been the perfect time for a fairy tale ending for Diego Sanchez's career. And who knows, we might get it. He might beat Pereira. But based on what I've seen, I don't like his chances here. The main reason why I don't like his chances are just simply because he's very flat-footed, like I say, very slow, doesn't move his head much. And while he will have a big advantage on the ground if he can get Pereira to the ground, the problem is Pereira moves around so much early on in a fight, and he's so fast and strong and explosive that it won't be easy for Sanchez to get him to the ground, because all of Sanchez's takedown entries come high above his opponent's hips. Earlier on in his career, he was very explosive. He did a good job of getting in deep on his opponent's hips, dragging him to the ground. But if you go back, watch his fights over the last few years, he's now much more stiff. And if you go back and watch Pereira's fight against Tristan Connolly, you'll see that very early on in the matchup, his takedown defense was pretty damn good. Even early in the second, it was pretty damn good while he still had gas in the tank. So I don't personally see Diego being able to weather the early storm, because Pereira is so fast, so explosive, he hits so hard. I just don't see an area where Diego can be safe early in this fight because of how easy he is to hit. So it is an incredibly bad matchup for Diego Sanchez, which is really sad. And as well as his age, there are also other red flags for us to think about. So, for example, he is training with this movement coach guy. He's who's all over his social media profile. This is him here. This movement coach guy who he's kind of fallen in love with, gone into business with. This movement coach is is also his manager. We're seeing Diego Sanchez, shave crazy patterns into the back of his head and talk like all kinds of crazy stuff in interviews. I mean, this is the guy here, Joshua Fabia, School of Self-Awareness. And it's also worth noting that, really, Diego Sanchez came into his last fight against Michael Chiesa looking softer than ever. Now, I know he's at welterweight and he competed at lightweight for a long period in his career, but we really haven't seen him look soft like that since his days at middleweight. So that is another bit of a red flag that maybe since leaving Jackson Wink MMA, Diego's not getting the best training in. Obviously, this is an old picture. He looks all right here, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is Diego's starting to look his age of 38 years old. So it is a very, very difficult fight for Diego Sanchez, this, which is really unfortunate, because when I started scanning through all the fights this weekend, Diego as an underdog was one of the first names that jumped out at me as a potential bet. I thought this would be a classic dog or pass matchup, but in actual fact, I lean quite heavily towards Michel Pereira here. The problem with Pereira is, if you look at his current odds, he's currently around about a 1.61 favourite, which is minus 164 for an implied probability of 62%. It's difficult for me to bet a guy at moderate favourite odds that may gas out after 2 or 3 minutes, because, let's be real, we know Diego Sanchez is an absolute nightmare on the ground, and if Diego can find a way to get this fight to the ground, Pereira is going to be in big trouble. And, with how active and aggressive Diego is on the ground, Pereira is going to gas out much faster than he did against Tristan Connolly. Also worth noting that if you can get Pereira down, he is incredibly weak off his back. But I do think we may see a different version of Michel Pereira this weekend. In all of his past fights, he walks to the octagon kind of like dancing around. In the octagon while they are reading his name out, he does all kind of crazy capoeira breakdancing techniques. And all this burns energy for no reason. He does so much pointless flim-flam in his fights, which exert energy, that could really get him into trouble against Diego Sanchez, that I think we'll see a different version of him this weekend. I think he'll fight smarter. I don't think we'll see as much, explosive, athletic, spinning attacks and crazy jumps and all that kind of stuff. I think the Tristan Connolly fight will probably have made him learn his lesson, and he'll show up and fight a lot smarter this weekend, pace himself a lot better, and if that happens, Diego could have his hands full, man. But let me know what you think about this fight, boys. Leave a comment below. Are you betting this fight? And I really want to get your opinions on how you feel the UFC are treating a legend like Diego Sanchez here. Do you think it's appropriate that they're matching him up with a guy that might essentially knock him out in 20 seconds, turn him into a highlight reel in his hometown at the age of 38 years old, after all he's done for the sport, all he's done to help grow the UFC? Let me know, boys. Leave a comment below. How do you feel about this fight? How do you feel about the way UFC are treating Diego Sanchez? I think this is why I'm a terrible businessman, because I could never treat a guy like this. If this was my business, if the UFC were my promotion, I would be taking much better care of guys like Diego Sanchez. So drop a comment below, guys. Let me know what you think. So anyway, let's get into the next fight. And I guess I should just wrap that last one up by saying, even though I think Pereira will win, betting on a guy as a moderate favourite that may gas out after 2 or 3 minutes doesn't make me feel good. So difficult to pull the trigger on Pereira at these odds, but I am keeping a close eye. I know a lot of people are, favouring Sanchez in this fight. If Pereira's odds get much better, I will be forced to pull the trigger on him. So now let's get into the next fight that I want to talk about, which is going to be Borg against Rogerio Bontorin. And this is an interesting one because Borg has decided to move back down to flyweight. So of course Borg was flyweight back in 2017 when he he fought Mighty Mouse for the title before his son ran into all the health problems, and then coming back from the time off that he had to take to look after his son, he obviously came back at bantamweight. But despite the fact that he came back at bantamweight, there were a few potential issues with his weight. For example, this fight against against Casey Kenny having to be contested at a 137-pound flyweight catchweight. Now, it was never actually confirmed at the time, but putting 2 and 2 together, it looks like they had to do the 137-pound catchweight because Borg was likely to miss weight. And of course, if we go back through Borg's career, he has a long history of weight issues. We can see that he missed weight against Louis Smoker. He missed weight against Jean Herrera. Has he missed weight against anyone else? No, just those two guys. But obviously then if we look into the detail of all these fights, Borg has got just a long history, man, of issues, getting sick on fight day, getting injured, missing weight. So what I would say about Borg, I know a lot of people are on Borg this weekend, and his odds have started to decline in the last sort of 24 hours. When I researched this fight yesterday, he was at around 1.71 everywhere. He's now down to 1.65 on 5 dimes. What I would say, if you're thinking about betting Borg in this fight, I would really recommend that you wait until the weigh-ins, because even if you might get slightly worse odds through waiting because the odds are declining, I feel that the information you get from seeing Borg weigh in for the first time at flyweight since 2017, I feel that the odds that you will miss out on because they're declining will be worth it based on the extra information you get from seeing Borg weigh in this weekend. Because with so many issues with Borg over the years, I'm skeptical as to how good he's really going to look at flyweight. And I mean, he's a very, very small fighter, man. 5'4", 63-inch reach. He's way too small for bantamweight anyway. But for whatever reason, over the years, he has had a problem making the 125-pound limit. So I would pump the brakes and be careful on betting Borg before you see him at the weigh-ins, boys. So anyway, how do these guys match up from a stylistic point of view? Well, it's actually quite difficult to form a strong opinion on this fight because we don't have too much footage available on Bontorin against a really high level of opponent. You can see many of his fights, dating back over the last 4 years, have ended very quickly. And the fights that have gone the distance, this fight against Biblatov, fight against Cardozo, these kind of fights, they don't really tell us much. What I can tell you is that Borg and Rogerio Bontorin are predominantly grapplers. I very much doubt that this fight is going to spend long standing up, because both guys pretty awkward strikers. They like to be all the way out or all the way in. You'll very rarely see these guys, chipping away at their opponent, getting into a kickboxing match. These boys are going to want it on the ground. Now, the difference in grappling between both guys is that Ray Borg fights at a very high pace. He's a hustler, man. He's constantly working, constantly trying to tie his opponent up, drag him to the ground, and just do work on the ground, really. Whereas Rogerio Bontorin, possibly because of his body type, he's a very, big, very muscular dude. Bontorin is much more methodical. He likes to pace himself. He's not going to go out there, start shooting takedowns for the first, from the first 30 seconds of the first round and risk gassing out. He'll pick his spots, maybe shoot 1 or 2 takedowns per round, and he's just way more strategic, really, in his approach and his pacing, whereas Borg is like a hurricane. Now, in terms of how these guys are likely to look on the ground, like I say, it's very, very difficult to call because we don't have a great deal of footage on Bontorin competing against a decent level of grappler on the ground. But what I would say, I can describe the distinction between both guys for you. So, Bontorin is a very, very fundamentally sound grappler in that he understands the importance of position over submission. He knows what to do in every position. He's very technical. He's very strong. Borg, on the other hand, is a bit wild. And because he is such a high-level grappler, what I've noticed about Borg in his last few fights is that he does get quite complacent. So you'll frequently see Borg give up position and put himself in bad positions because he's so confident in his ability to hit reversals or create scrambles or get out of these bad positions that he just doesn't always watch his P's and Q's, which could possibly get him into trouble against a guy like Bontorin. But then, we've seen Borg hang on the ground, with really talented grapplers like Mighty Mouse, Yuzier Formiga, who's one of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners in the flyweight division, and he's been okay. So, when you see Borg able to mix it up with a guy like Formiga, for the most part, be a couple minutes away from mixing it up with a guy like Mighty Mouse, how much is Bontorin really going to be able to hurt him on the ground? It's difficult to say, but I do worry a little bit about where Borg is at this stage in his career. So I'm sorry that I can't really give you any, tangible, reliable, high quality glimpses or insights into how this fight might play out, but I'm finding it difficult to form a strong opinion on this fight simply because I don't know a lot about Bontorin. There's not a great deal of footage available on his grappling. I can tell he's a grappler because of his square stance when he's standing. He's got a very square wrestling stance. But on the ground, I'm not sure how he's going to do against Borg. This might be one of those fights that comes down to, the odd scramble, ends up being a split decision. I don't have a strong opinion on it, boys. I'm not going to bet this fight because I don't have a strong lean either way. I would not argue either way that either guy should be favoured. Borg, money coming in on Borg, his odds declining in the last sort of 24 hours. He's now down to a 1.67 favourite on average, which is minus 149 for an implied probability of 60%. Can you cap Borg at 65% territory, which you'd need to get value here? Is tough for me because we don't know a lot about Bontorin's grappling. And similarly, if you look at the odds on Bontorin, currently around about a 2.30 underdog, which is plus 130 for an implied probability of 43%. Tough for me to find value there either, because you'd have to give him around about a 50% chance of winning, and we know Borg's an absolute nightmare on the ground. We don't know how Bontorin's going to deal with that. So now let's go into the next fight that I want to talk about in today's video, which is going to be the first fight from the husband and wife duo that is competing on this card. I'm not sure if this is the first time we have ever seen a husband and wife duo compete in the UFC. Did Kim Couture ever fight in the UFC? I'm not quite sure. Let me know, boys, if this is the first time a husband and wife have ever competed on the same card, or even if a husband and wife have ever competed in the UFC. please drop a comment below and let me know. But this is going to be Mark De La Rosa against Julian Paiva, and I've just noticed since starting to record this video, that as well as the odds declining on Ray Borg, the odds are actually starting to decline on Julian Paiva as well. When I looked yesterday, when I was researching this fight, he was around about a 1.48 underdog. He's now down to about a 1.44 underdog on average. 1.48 favourite, down to about a 1.44 favourite on average. So you better bet this dude fast if you're planning to bet him. So 1.44 gives him money line odds of minus 227 for an implied probability of 69%. And I can tell you that I can definitely see why this guy is the favourite in this matchup. I can see why people are betting him. Paiva's very good, and this is a very good stylistic matchup for him. Straight off the bat, nice little X factor for Paiva is that he will have a decent size advantage here. He's 5'8" with a 69.5-inch reach, compared to De La Rosa, who's only 5'6" with a 65-inch reach. So this reach advantage could really pay dividends for Paiva in this fight, because Paiva is one of these guys that does do a great job of fighting very long. Paiva will have a big striking advantage in this fight. He's got great striking defense, really good boxing. Paiva's one of these guys that can stand right in front of his opponent, see all the shots coming, and use beautiful subtle head movement to either slip punches or ride with the punches, similar to what we were talking about, something that Tim Means does very well. We were talking about that in the video that I put out yesterday for the Tim Means-Rodriguez fight. Paiva's very, very good, and I mean, it probably won't, his defense won't probably matter that much in this fight, because Mark De La Rosa is not a particularly effective striker, but it's something that I noticed in Paiva that's super impressive, because he's only 24 years old, and to see a 24-year-old already with really, really good striking defense is super impressive, man. One of the areas where I think Paiva can have a lot of success, aside from his boxing, will be with his leg kicks. He throws very, very nice leg kicks, and leg kicks are a technique that Mark De La Rosa has been particularly susceptible to in the past. So Paiva's leg kicks likely to help him out big time in this fight. Now, in terms of striking, can definitely see why Paiva is a big favourite here. But my concern with betting him in this matchup as a pretty big favourite is that we don't know a lot about his grappling. Now, Mark De La Rosa is a strong wrestler. He was formerly a part of Team Takedown with Johnny Hendricks. He's got very, very good wrestling when he uses it. But the thing about Mark De La Rosa that's really strange is that he doesn't actually shoot many takedowns. He only really shoots 1 or 2 takedowns per round, and I'm not convinced that is going to be enough against Paiva, because Paiva has proven to be quite difficult to hold down. Again, my problem with betting this fight is that we haven't really got a lot of information on Paiva's grappling. And he's only fought a low level of opponent before coming into the UFC. Kai Kara-France is a striker, Nascimento is a striker, and this fight ended very quickly, so we don't know a lot about Paiva. So from my perspective, Paiva very similar to Bontorin, except with Paiva, we can tell 100% that he has a big advantage over, De La Rosa standing up. Except with Bontorin, we don't know if he's got an advantage over Borg anyway. The thing I would say about this fight is, in order for me to bet a guy in this odds range, they've really got to tick every single box, because you've got to give him a better than 70% chance of winning to find any value. And I guess I can't blame anyone for betting Paiva, because I do feel De La Rosa will struggle to hold him down. I do feel De La Rosa will struggle to cause Paiva problems on the ground, and I do feel like Paiva will dominate the fight standing. So I can see why people are betting Paiva at these odds. All I would say is, I personally, if I bet Paiva, I would personally feel a little bit uneasy not knowing anything about his ground game. Like, for all we know, if De La Rosa was able to get on top of Paiva, maybe Paiva would be super weak off his back. I guess one nagging doubt that I have is that Paiva is 24 years old. He's had 21 pro fights, and his striking defense, striking offense, he looks excellent for a 24-year-old. I guess my concern is there's only so many hours in the day. So if he looks this good as a striker, realistically, he must have holes somewhere, because he can't be great at everything at 24 years old, or it's very unlikely that he's great at everything at 24 years old. So I would just say, even though there have been flashes of solid grappling from him, how good really is his grappling? I'm not too sure. I'm a bit disappointed Paiva's odds have declined. I was hoping they would improve and I would take a shot on him. Guess you guys just have to make your own mind up on whether you are happy to take a shot on Paiva at these odds, knowing that it's a little bit uncertain what might happen if De La Rosa comes into this fight with that grappling heavy game plan, which is unlikely because he never does. But then, you look at De La Rosa, he's got a daughter, he's a young, hungry, ambitious fighter at 25 years old. He's on a 2-fight losing streak. If he loses this fight, he's probably going to get released from the UFC, so you'd anticipate that if ever he's going to come into a fight and fight smart and use his wrestling, this is going to be the fight, because at the end of the day, he's fighting for his dinner, right? One more loss, and he's probably out of a job. So that is it for that fight, boys. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Definitely wouldn't bet De La Rosa here, because I think if Paiva does have a relatively decent ground game and is quite difficult to hold down, he's going to put on an absolute clinic and dominate. And now we go on to the next fight that I want to talk about in today's video. And we've just gone from talking about, Mark De La Rosa. Now we're going to talk about his wife, Montana De La Rosa, who is also a young, hungry, ambitious young fighter. And it's great to see Montana De La Rosa's improvement. She is making gigantic improvements from fight to fight. So I'm very excited to see how she looks this weekend. So from a technical point of view, there is no doubt that Montana De La Rosa is better than Mara, Romero, Borella everywhere. If the fight stays standing, there are very few girls in this division that Montana De La Rosa will have an advantage over when it comes to striking, because her striking defense isn't great. Her technique is a little bit green, but I would give her an advantage over Mara, Romero, Borella standing. Borella is quite passive, doesn't have any power in her hands at all, and Borella's striking defense isn't great either. De La Rosa is clearly working really, really hard on her striking, and she's made gigantic improvements to her striking since coming off The Ultimate Fighter. When she was on The Ultimate Fighter almost 2 years ago, she really didn't have any striking at all. And then if you go and look at her fight against Andrea Lee, at least early on, she hung in there. She did okay. It was super impressive to see. So De La Rosa will definitely have the advantage standing. But I don't expect that to count for too much in this matchup, because both De La Rosa and Borella are grapplers, and they always want to get this fight to the ground. Both these girls either want to fight in the clinch or on the ground. And from a technical point of view, when it comes to actual grappling technique, Montana De La Rosa is light years ahead of Borella when it comes to grappling. She's got great chain wrestling, good takedown entries, and very, very tricky, slick submissions on the ground. But that can also get her into trouble, because De La Rosa at 24 years old, she's still inexperienced, she's still learning, she's still a little bit green, and she does often make the wrong decision on the ground in terms of hunting for long shot submissions over just maintaining position and just, taking the round through controlling her opponent. And that could be a bit of a problem here against Borella, because there's no question that De La Rosa is the more technically skilled grappler, but so often in women's MMA, we see physicality play a huge role in the outcome of a fight. So if you look at De La Rosa, she's very feminine, she's very slight. And if you look at Borella, you just look at her in the cage, she's very physically imposing, very strong, very muscular. And that kind of physicality, particularly in women's MMA, can close the gap in a huge way. Borella isn't particularly skilled in the clinch, she's not a particularly skilled grappler, but she is very, very heavy from top position. And my fear for De La Rosa in this fight is that if the fight goes to the ground and she starts chasing these long shot submissions, she could quite easily find herself in a position where she ends up in the bottom chasing a long shot submission, and Borella just ends up on top and completely shuts her submission offense down and just chips away at her from top position and wins a decision. if you go back and watch De La Rosa's fight against Nico Montano on The Ultimate Fighter, she looked pretty damn weak off her back. And while this fight was a very long time ago, and she's probably improved a ton since then, until we actually see it, we can't assume that she is better off her back now. She is better at working her way back to her feet, and Borella does have a heavy top game. It is also worth noting that Borella, we'll just call her Borella, Borella, bit of a tongue twister, does train at American Top Team with some of the best fighters in the world. She's been training at American Top Team for the last few years now. Here she is with Josie Formiga, whereas Montana De La Rosa does train at kind of like small independent gyms, and she certainly isn't getting in training with the level of opponent that Borella is. Here you can see her with Christina Williams from Bellator, that is a kickboxer. But yeah, De La Rosa definitely not putting in the kind of work that Borella is in the gym every day. You know what they say, boys, iron sharpens iron. And I'm sure Borella will be coming into this fight very well prepared, knowing exactly what to expect from Montana De La Rosa, with some of the best coaches in the world behind her. So there's no doubt that De La Rosa should be the favourite here. If we look at her odds are also declining in the last 24 hours. Currently around about a 1.57 favourite, which is minus 175 for an implied probability of 64%. In order to get value on De La Rosa here, you'd have to be capping her at close to 70%, which is tricky for me. Only when you take into consideration the fact that physicality does quite often play a big factor in women's MMA. You take into consideration the fact that she does give up position a lot. And also, we've seen this past weekend, MMA judges are very, 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 very bad. And I always feel a little bit nervous capping female fighters up into the 70% range because of how competitive many female fights tend to be, right? If these girls end up on the ground, mixing it up, battling for position, it could get messy. Scorecards could be all over the place. So I'd need to feel super confident in a female fighter to pull the trigger on them at these odds, especially in an athletic commission, especially in a state like New Mexico where the athletic commission aren't the best. Probably not going to have the best judges this weekend. And similarly, if you look at the odds on Mara Romero Borella, she's currently around about a 2.50 underdog, which is plus 150 for an implied probability of 40%. I'd want to be capping her at least 50% in order to get any value here, and it just doesn't sit right with me betting someone like Borella at these odds, knowing that she's second best to Montana De La Rosa everywhere. So this fight is a pass for me, but as well as Paiva, I'm going to be keeping an eye on De La Rosa's odds. You never know, we might see a lot of line movement on fight day. De La Rosa is a fighter that's on my radar for betting, so is Paiva. And I guess I'm just going to see how the odds move throughout the week and then make a decision on it later on in the week, boys. Right, let's get into the next fight, which is going to be Lando Vannata against Yancy Medeiros. This fight is total chaos, absolute fucking chaos, and the odds reflect that because both guys currently around about even money, although again, we are seeing a lot of odds movement on this card in the last 24 hours because when I looked yesterday on 5 dimes, Lando Vannata was around about 1.91, which I believe is like minus 110. Yep, minus 110, and he's now down to 1.77 on some sites, which is minus 130, which is super interesting. And I can see why, man. I mean, where do I begin on this one? This is a fight where I just... If you bump into anyone this week that feels really confident in Vannata or Medeiros, run a mile from him, because there's no way to feel confident in either of these boys. And I do think the bookies have nailed the odds on this. I think the odds are spot on. Both guys are anywhere around even money is definitely correct because anything can happen in this matchup. Now, with that being said, This is a terrible stylistic matchup for Yancy Medeiros. Terrible. Because if Vannata actually shows up and performs to his full potential, which he might not because he's very inconsistent, but if Vannata does, Medeiros is in big trouble. I didn't actually I didn't actually realize until researching this fight just how bad Yancy Medeiros' striking defense was. Boys, it is very bad. Like, he is a sitting duck to being KO'd. There is no way on earth I would bet Yancy Medeiros in this fight at anything under 2.50. There's just no way. There is absolutely no way. I don't even think he would be a very good bet at 2.50, which is a million miles away from where he is now. 2.50 would be plus 150. I'd probably need like 2.70 plus 170 to take a gamble on Medeiros. This is just a horrible stylistic matchup for Medeiros because he just doesn't move his head. I don't know how much more clearer I can make that. And he also doesn't have the chin to back it up. It's not like he doesn't move his head, but he can take a shot. He gets rocked, dropped, wobbled, or knocked out in pretty much every single one of his fights. And what I would also say is this is his second fight back at lightweight after a little bit of a stint at welterweight. And he's way slower and way easier to hit in the lightweight division. Way more flat-footed, way more stiff, way more rigid. This is a great stylistic matchup for Lando Vannata this weekend if Vannata shows up. And of course, that is the problem with Lando Vannata. He is incredibly inconsistent. Like, it's very sad what's going on with Vannata, man. Like, he's such a talented fighter, but he's been quite open, on social media about all the demons he battles. He struggles with depression and anxiety. And it's a real big shame, man, because he's so talented. But I do think that his battles with mental health do have a massive impact on his performances. And he is incredibly inconsistent, not just from fight to fight, but also inconsistent from round to round. You quite often see completely different versions of Lando in the same fight, but in different rounds. If you go and watch the fight against Matt Frivola, it's a great example of this. And there's one particular version of Vannata that we have seen that I think can just destroy Yancy Medeiros, but we don't necessarily see this version of Vannata often enough to feel super confident in him here. So the version of Vannata I'm talking about is the Vannata that uses his boxing. Vannata has excellent timing. He covers distance so quickly. He's so fast, so explosive. His timing's impeccable with his boxing when he's actually focusing on boxing. The problem with Vannata is that it's almost like he's just a big ball of energy that just wants to explode and do everything. And at times that means his performances are a little bit muddled, right? Quite often what you'll see Vannata do, a different side to Vannata, is you'll quite often just see him kind of follow his opponent around the octagon and blast them with really unorthodox, flashy kicks. I don't believe that version of Vannata will be particularly effective against Medeiros because Medeiros is tough. He really struggles in the boxing department, but I'm not sure if Vannata is going to be able to hurt him too much with the kicks. I think Medeiros will see a lot of the kicks come in, and for the most part, he'll be okay. The third version of Vannata, and the least effective version of Vannata, is the version that for whatever reason just kind of zombie modes his opponent around the cage, just kind of follows them round, doesn't really land anything, and just kind of headhunts. Now you see this version of Vannata quite a lot when he's got his opponent hurt early in a fight and they fight through it. He will fall into the trap of, instead of setting up those big power strikes with a flim-flam and throwing his really diverse range of strikes, he'll get into the habit of just becoming quite predictable, following his opponent around, trying to land the kill shot again, but in the process of trying to land the kill shot, quite frequently getting outworked or outstriked. So those are outstruck. So those are kind of like the three different versions of Lando that we see. The Lando that focuses on his boxing is a total nightmare for Medeiros. And if Vannata comes into this fight with a game plan centered around that version of himself, Medeiros is screwed. I really don't see a way that Medeiros would win this fight if that version of Vannata shows up. But the other two versions that do rear their ugly head for large portions of his fights, Medeiros will probably do okay against those versions, because Medeiros is scrappy, does show a high volume of strikes, and he's not going anywhere, man. Medeiros is the kind of guy that you have to practically kill in order to beat. So when you look at Medeiros, there's no way that I would bet him in this fight, because he is a knockout waiting to happen. But when it comes to guys like Vannata, I feel like because he's so inconsistent, you can never bet him as a favourite, because you never know what version of him is going to show up. 50% of the time he's going to show up and look amazing. 50% of the time he's not going to show up at all and he's going to look very poor. So you need dog odds to bet a guy like Vannata, and unfortunately we don't have dog odds here. Vannata is a slight favourite, which means there's absolutely no value on him at all. This fight is total chaos. It could go either way. Definitely lean towards Vannata, but whether you bet either guy in this fight, you're putting your money in a lot of danger, and I would highly, highly, highly recommend a pass. It's a very entertaining fight, probably going to be the best fight on the entire card. I would just say chill out, grab some popcorn, and enjoy the fight as a fan, because in terms of betting, this one could go either way, and there's no strong positions to put your money. So we now go on to the next fight that I want to talk about in this video, which is going to be Devin Clark against Dequan Townsend. And once again, Dequan Townsend is stepping up on short notice to face someone else, right? He's going back up to light heavyweight in this fight, and Dequan Townsend loves to step up on short notice. But one of the impressive things about Dequan Townsend is that even though he steps up to take these fights on short notice, his cardio is actually pretty good. He can still fight at a decent pace for 3 rounds, which is super, super impressive. So Dequan Townsend fought last month against Bevon Lewis, who is Devin Clark's teammate. Both these guys train together at Jackson Wink MMA. So it's fair to say that the Jackson Wink team will be very, very aware of Dequan Townsend, what he does well, what he doesn't do so well, and what he brings to the table this weekend. So this is a very, very easy fight for Devin Clark. Very, very good stylistic matchup, but of course his odds do reflect that. He's currently, the second biggest favourite on the card, behind Macy Chiasson, and I can definitely see why. It's a horrible matchup for Dequan Townsend. Devin Clark, obviously a pretty strong wrestler. He was a JUCO level wrestler, and Devin Clark has very, very nice deep double leg takedown entries, and what I really like about Devin Clark is if he doesn't get the takedown on the initial entry, he's great at hitting those trip takedowns. Devin Clark doesn't have a particularly heavy top game, but then Dequan Townsend is incredibly weak off his back, so it might not matter. If Clark can get the takedowns, Dequan's probably going to spend a lot of time on his back, simply because he's not particularly effective at working his way back to his feet. Now, Devin Clark is one of these wrestlers that isn't very good at taking his opponents down if they stuff the initial entry and manage to get their back to the cage. Clark's chain wrestling isn't particularly good, but his initial entry, his explosive double leg drive, is absolutely superb. I love Devin Clark's takedown defense. I love Devin Clark's initial takedown entry. It's very, very good, and he does stand a very, very good chance at getting this fight to the ground, because Dequan Townsend doesn't have the best takedown defense, stands quite flat-footed, and he's going to be very, very susceptible to those trip takedowns that Devin likes to hit. The problem, of course, is Devin Clark is a big favourite, so it's no surprise this is a great stylistic matchup for him. For the most part, his advantages are baked into his odds. So if we look at the current average odds available, which is 1.29 minus 345 for an implied probability of 78%, you'd have to be giving Clark around about an 80% chance or better of winning this fight to get any value. Very, very difficult for me to do that. It's not crazy, but I think the thing that I don't like about capping Devin Clark up in that odds range is that he is very hittable. Now, Clark has kind of accepted this in his last few fights, and now he's one of these guys that likes to be all the way outside of his opponent's range or all the way in, working with takedowns, which does make it a little bit harder to catch him. But Clark is there to be hit. He is very reckless. And while Dequan Townsend isn't a particularly effective striker, if we look at Dequan's record, he's gone the distance with plenty of dudes that are at a very, very low level. Dequan isn't particularly dangerous standing. His striking technique is pretty sloppy. What I would say, though, is, similar to his teammate last week, Kalen Williams, he does sit down very, very hard on his shots, and he throws everything into his punches, and he's very, very explosive. So when he does come forward and let his hands go, he throws everything into it. And if he does connect, he's a big, strong, powerful, athletic dude. He is going to hurt you. Now, he's not as athletic as his teammate Kalen Williams. He's a little bit more flat-footed, but he's a big boy, man. And I wouldn't feel comfortable betting Devin Clark as a big favourite, knowing that he is there to be hit. He has been dinged very, very frequently in his UFC career, and know that Dequan commits everything to his power strikes, and he's looking to take you out. At the same time, I wouldn't feel comfortable rolling the dice on Dequan as a big underdog, because stylistically it's a terrible matchup for him, and Devin Clark should win easily. So we now move on to the main event of this weekend, which is going to be Corey Anderson against Jan Blachowicz. Now, I've been close to betting on Corey Anderson all this week, and I haven't decided whether I'm betting on this fight yet. I really haven't. It's one of the reasons why this video is coming out a little bit later this week than I wanted it to. It's truly because I'm really on the fence about betting Corey Anderson, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet. I'm kind of just hoping the odds continue to improve. All week they've been improving a little bit and then coming back down, and then improving a little bit and then coming back down. But I do know a lot of people are on Jan Blachowicz this week, so what I'm hoping for is a ton of late money comes in on Blachowicz on fight day, and then I can maybe bet Corey Anderson at better odds than he is at the moment. So if we look at Corey Anderson, he's currently around about a 1.50 favourite, which is minus 200 for an implied probability of 67%. To get any value on him, you'd want to be capping him at about 70%. And if we look at the odds on Jan Blachowicz, he's currently around about a 2.70 underdog, which is plus 170 for an implied probability of 37%. So to get any value on Jan here in a high risk bet like this, I'd want to be giving him around about a 50% chance of winning. Not everyone will look for a margin that big, but that's the margin I like on high risk bets, and I definitely can't get to 50% on Jan for the reasons that I'll talk about in this video. So I guess my issue with betting Corey at the moment is that I'm just not sure if I'm getting a very good deal on him. I definitely heavily favour him in this fight, but I don't know if I love the odds. I guess that's my biggest issue. There's maybe a little bit of value in his odds, but I'm not sure. I'm finding it difficult to quantify whether there's value here, simply because if you go back and watch Corey Anderson's fights, you'll actually see that he is incredibly reckless, and he is very, very hittable. The concerning thing about Corey is he doesn't appear to be addressing that weakness. He's still as reckless as he ever was. If you look at his fight against Johnny Walker, he came out very aggressive, got the big knockout win early, he looked great. But you've always got to pay attention to what is happening in the matchups, and when you go back and watch Corey Anderson in that fight, he's just super reckless, man. He went right after Johnny Walker, running forward in straight lines, chin up high and exposed, winging these big, long, wild hooks, and he could quite easily have got caught by Walker. He didn't show Walker any respect, and that is a big concern for me. Also saw the same thing in round one against Ilir Latifi. Didn't show Latifi any respect, and Latifi actually landed a big right hook on him at one point, which led to his corner, Mark Henry, actually telling him off and telling him to fucking concentrate or he's going to get himself knocked out. And Corey actually visibly signals over to Mark Henry, alright, I'm sorry, I get it. And this isn't the first time we've seen recklessness from Corey Anderson. He got dropped at the end of round 1 by Ovin St. Preux and knocked out in round 3 with a head kick in a fight that otherwise he was doing very well in. Knocked out by Jimmy Manuwa. And knocked out in round 3 against Jambalante. And I wouldn't say Corey Anderson has got a bad chin. I would just say that for whatever reason, he is a little bit reckless and he does get dinged a lot, which is a big concern when you're fighting anyone in the light heavyweight division. And I guess the problem that I've got with this fight, before I go into how I think it's most likely to play out and why I do favour Corey so heavily here, the biggest issue that I've got in this fight is that I'm finding it difficult to quantify what level of risk to give, or what level of risk really to assign to Cap in this fight, knowing that Corey Anderson does get dinged a lot and knowing that he is quite reckless. I'm not sure if I'm being overly cautious here if I pass on it. Because if we look at a guy like Jan Blachowicz, he's had over 30 pro fights. And Blachowicz isn't that dangerous. Like, if we look at his record, we can see that, he's knocked Rockhold out there. He's finished Latifi with a body kick in his UFC debut. But aside from that, I'm guessing this was a TKO win. But aside from that, that's 2 wins with strikes in his last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 fights. So Blachowicz only has 2 wins with strikes in his last 18 fights, which would suggest that he's not very dangerous at all when it comes to striking. But does that say more about the opponents that he's been facing than his skills? I guess that's what I'm trying to work out, what I'm battling with at the moment, and why I'm bringing you this video when I haven't fully processed everything and finished thinking about this fight from a betting perspective myself yet. So just sharing my thoughts with you, and I'd love to know what you guys think about how I feel about this matchup in the comments below. Let me know how you're feeling. And let me know if you think I'm being overly cautious or if you think I'm being right to be cautious. My problem with this fight is, on paper, Blachowicz doesn't look dangerous at all. Only 2 wins in his last 18 fights. Only 2 wins due to strikes in his last 18 fights. Not good. But then when you look at the guys that he's been fighting, obviously Jacare's got a granite chin. He knocked Rockhold out. Santos very tough, went the distance with John Jones. We know Krylov's very tough. Manua, is a little bit chinny, but the majority of this fight was contested in the clinch. Cannonier is tough. He finished Devin Clark. Cummins is very, very tough. He's got a crazy chin. Gustafsson, very tough. Igor Prokrayach, very tough. He lost at Corey Anderson. This fight again was contested in the clinch, and then he did finish Ilir Latifi, right, with strikes. So on one hand, his record doesn't look good. He doesn't look that dangerous. But on the other hand, is it because of the guys that he's been facing? Are we being unfair to Jan Blachowicz by saying he's not that dangerous? When you actually go and watch Jan Blachowicz fight, I can say that his striking does not look that effective. And it's mainly because of his age, right? He's 36 years old. He's going to be 37 years old next week. And he is a guy that is starting to look like Father Time might be catching up on him. He's very, very stiff, very slow, very rigid, not really that effective with his strikes at all. My concern is he might not have to be if Corey Anderson starts getting sucked into, reckless exchanges. Blachowicz clearly does have some degree of power because he was able to break Luke Rockhold's jaw. And as much as people want to make fun of Rockhold and kind of, say he's done and all this kind of stuff, at the end of the day, Blachowicz still carried enough power to break a man's jaw who is a professional fighter. You've got to give him some respect for that. And like I say, Corey Anderson is very, very, very much there to be hit. But I do think that this is a bad stylistic matchup for Jan Blachowicz because at 37 years old, he does have to pace himself. And there is that old saying, Chael Sonnen always said, when a young fighter fights an old fighter and they win, when they rematch, the only difference is the young fighter wins in way more dominant fashion than they did in the first fight. And of course, Corey Anderson's already beaten Jan Blachowicz back in 2015. But of course, both guys have changed a hell of a lot since then. The biggest change that I've seen from Blachowicz since then is dramatically improved takedown defense. Blachowicz is one of these guys that is surprisingly difficult to take down, but if you do take him down, he is ridiculously weak off his back. Corey Anderson doesn't have a particularly heavy top game, but if he can get Blachowicz down, Anderson's going to be, having a field day. He's probably going to be able to rack up quite a decent amount of top control because of how weak Blachowicz is off his back. Now, Blachowicz is one of these guys that is incredibly difficult to take down against the cage, but his takedown offense out in the octagon isn't very good. So what I mean by that is if you get in deep on his legs and hit like a nice reactive double leg in the middle of the octagon, he's quite easy to take down and quite weak off his back. But if you shoot a takedown and you drive him into the cage, he's great at defending takedowns against the cage. He does a great job of, digging deep underhooks and using the cage as a tool to maintain balance. It's very, very difficult to take him down against the cage. Now, what's interesting about Corey Anderson is that he's very, very similar in a way to Devin Clark. He's got a nice reactive double leg takedown, but if his opponents can get their back to the cage and start to use the cage to defend the takedown, he becomes incredibly ineffective at working the takedowns against the cage. He just isn't the best chain wrestler, and all of his wrestling very, very high up above his opponent's hips. If Corey can't get the reactive double leg out in the center of the octagon, I actually feel he will really struggle to take Yan down against the cage. Luke Rockhold is much, much, much better at chain wrestling, and he couldn't get Blachowicz down in that first round. If Rockhold couldn't get, Blachowicz down against the cage, very unlikely Anderson will be able to, at least early on in the fight when Blachowicz is fresh. And this brings me on to the reason why I think this is a pretty bad stylistic matchup for Blachowicz. So, at almost 37 years old, Blachowicz is a guy that does need to pace himself. He does slow down as the fight goes on. And because of this, he is quite passive, quite tentative at this stage in his career. We saw that in his fight against Ronaldo Jacare Souza. Now, the problem with this fight is that when you look at what skills both guys bring to the table, I do think Blachowicz can make it close in the sense that Anderson's not a particularly effective striker. I do actually give Anderson a slight advantage when it comes to striking, but that's only because he's the busier fighter out of the two. My concern is, from a skill point of view, it's not like Corey Anderson runs away with this fight, but in terms of the way the fight is likely to play out, a 5-round matchup is a bit of a nightmare for Blachowicz because Anderson has got the cardio to fight at a high pace for 20 rounds. He never slows down. He's always working. And even if he can't have too much success with his striking early in the fight, even if he can't get Blachowicz down early in the fight, I think if Corey Anderson comes in and hustles hard early, drives Blachowicz into the cage, it doesn't really matter whether he gets the takedowns or not. As long as he's making Blachowicz work to defend the takedowns, that's going to pay dividends later on in the fight when Yan starts to slow down. And the reason why I really like Corey in this fight is because I have a hard time seeing how Yan is going to win rounds 4 and 5. I just don't see it, because I know in rounds 4 and 5 Corey would not have slowed down at all. He's still going to be shooting takedowns. He's still going to be very busy, whereas Yan probably would have slowed down a lot in rounds 4 and 5, which means that even though Yan has got the skills to make this a competitive close fight, Corey would only have to win one of the first, second or third rounds in order to win a decision. I just cannot see a realistic situation where Blachowicz would win rounds 4 and 5, and it's highly unlikely Blachowicz does enough to put his stamp on rounds 1, 2 and 3 to win a 49-48 decision. So that's why I'm heavily leaning towards Corey. That's why I am thinking of betting Corey. But my main concern is how easy he is to hit. He gets dinged a lot, boys. He does get dinged a lot. He's reckless. He is there to be hit. So I don't know what I'm going to do about this fight. Heavily lean towards Corey Anderson. I just don't think I'm getting a great deal on his odds. And I always go back to using the example of, going into a shop and getting a good deal, right? Everyone wants to get a good deal. You walk past the shop with a sale sign, you go into the shop, you want to get a good deal. Say they've got a sale on, there are 3 different types of sale items you could find, right? Say you go into a shop and you see a sweater on the rail that you really, really like. You might go up to the sweater, look at the price, and the price is way too high. You love the price, you love the sweater, but you look at the price and you think, do you know what? It's not worth it. That's way too expensive. Costs way too much. I'm not going to pay that price for that sweater. You put it back on the rail. You look for something else. There's the second category of sale item where you see the sweater, you look at the price tag, you look at the price, and you think, do you know what? That's a fair price. I like the price of that sweater. I think I'm going to buy it. And then there's the third category of sale item where you go up to a sweater on the rail, you look at the price, and it is super cheap. It is way cheaper than you thought it would be. It's a great deal, and you immediately rip it off the rail and put it in your basket because you don't want to miss out on such a great deal. Because MMA is so chaotic and unpredictable, I like to get a really, really good deal on every single bet that I place. I don't want to be, paying too much, and I definitely don't want to be paying exactly what I think the price should be. I like to get a really, really good deal when I'm placing MMA bets. And I guess for me, if you look at the fights that I've talked about in today's video, the fighters that I do like, Rowley and Paiva, Montana De La Rosa and Corey Anderson, what I would say is the Montana De La Rosa and Rowley and Paiva fights at the moment are, sweaters that I really like, but when you look at the price tag, they're a little bit too expensive for me. Even though I like the sweater, I don't really want to pay that price, so I put it back on the rail. If you look at the Corey Anderson bet, that price is a good price, it's a fair price, but I don't know if I'm getting as good a deal as I need to get in order to pull the trigger. So I'm very much on the fence on Corey Anderson at the moment. I think he wins, but I would like the odds to be a bit better than what they are. And by releasing this video, his odds probably aren't going to improve, because whenever I say I really like a fighter in a video, his odds get completely destroyed. Of course, we said Tim Means earlier on was a good bet at 1.40 based on Daniel Rodriguez's past fights, and literally within an hour of me putting that video out, Tim Means' odds declined by 10%. So I'm sure Anderson's odds won't improve now I've put this video out, but that's the way it is. Anyway, boys, let me know what you think of this video today. If you liked it, if you disagree with anything I've said, let me know. If you think I've missed anything out, let me know. I hope you appreciated it. If you want me to do a live stream this weekend on fight day, where we dig through all these fights and try and find a decent value prop bet for every single fight, you know what to do, boys. Hit the like button below. If we get 300 likes, I will do that live stream. And also, if you appreciate this content, please subscribe to my channel. It would mean a lot. And also, why not drop by my website and say hi in our chat room? I would love to speak to you guys, get to know you a little bit better. It's completely free. Just sign up for a free account. Let's get to know each other. I'm online every day. So anyway, take care, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. Have a great night.